talk to Betty.
Good evening and welcome to the November 17th, 2015 regular Salem City Council meeting. It will now come to order. This evening, we do not have anybody from the Church Association. We don't have Mr. Faber, so it's going to fall upon me for the invocation. That'll be followed by the pledge. So if you please rise. Lord, please watch over us this evening as we bring business before this body and as we try to do well for the citizens of this town and see that we all can do this in an orderly fashion and manner. Please watch over us. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown? Here. Mr. Cushman?
Here.
Mrs. Dickey?
Here.
Mr. Drummond?
Here.
Mr. Whitehill?
Here.
5 members.
Mrs. Dickey.
I'd like to make a motion that we excuse Mr. Paparotis.
All right, second from Mr. Brown. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown? Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Move to excuse Mr. Nestick tonight.
All right. Mr. Cushman seconds that. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown? Yes. Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Those 2 members are excused. Everybody's received a copy of the minutes from the November 4th, 2015 meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions to those minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved. We have no petitions and remonstrances this evening. Move on to receiving of visitors. First is Scott Cahill on IPMC, lighting, and couldn't make out the last word there.
God knows.
Go ahead.
Mr. President, ladies and members of council, Mr. Mayor, Scott Cahill. The IPMC, I think that everyone has considered, and I hope that everyone is in agreement, that we must have a board of appeals comprised of professionals in the engineering and construction disciplines. And I would personally like to see that a separate board from the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is a completely different function. I hope that that happens. I will mention again procurement regulations. I hope we keep that on the burner. I hope we head in that direction. Also have some issues of safety. One of those is an issue of lighting in particular. I note, and some of my neighbors have come to me and mentioned that the lights are out on our war memorial. In the past, some of the lighting has been out on Lundy between State and Sugar Tree. And in fact, that little antique store was robbed there when the light was burned out. So I think this burned out lighting has a direct effect on safety of our citizens. So I would really like to see us, I know that we're in a tight budget time, but this is an important thing, I think, to keep our streets lighted. I also wanted to mention specifically, and if I may think so much of myself as to speak for the citizens of this city, who I talk to constantly, I'd like to give my sincerest personal thanks to Mr. Drummond for the service that he's given this city. We have not always seen eye to eye. In fact, we've argued from time to time. You're pig-headed, and I adore you, Mr. Drummond. You have always acted in the best interest of the whole, even when it was not in your personal best interest. And you've gained my great respect and the great respect of the people of the city, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cahill. Next, we have Jeff Johnson, fluoride infant warning.
Hello, Council. Thank you, President. My name is Jeff Johnson. Many of you know me as the guy who continuously comes to City Council to speak about fluoride. I would like to simply remark before further speaking that I'm not against fixing our water supply or cleaning it in any way. Fluoride, however, is not used for the purpose of cleaning our water supply. Since coming to city council and speaking, I've learned two things in doing so. I've learned that many people see my different views as oppositions to the status quo. The second thing I learned is that as a citizen, my voice is limited if I attempt every undertaking alone. I am no longer alone in this fight. I do have some outside direction coming from credible groups as well as support of a couple hundred people in Ohio. I am coming before council this evening to speak once more about an issue I feel is highly important to our community and the younger generations. It is law that Ohio has a state mandate regulating and requiring by law that fluoride be supplied to all water supplies that supply more than 5,000 citizens. Unfortunately, the deadline to opt out was before I was born, so I feel slightly up against the wall with that said. It is not that fluoride can't be avoided somewhat with some filters and a reverse osmosis system. However, so many people here live paycheck to paycheck, so opting to buy a system is far from being financially feasible. The fact that Salem has such a large population of young families is what worries me the most. It has been officially released by the CDC, the American Association of Pediatrics, and as recently the FDA, that ingesting fluoride is dangerous in young children, much more than that of an adult, with absorption rates as high as 400%. The study findings of a Harvard medical research study raised more alarm. In this study, the PhD students' research found that a link between fluoride and osteosarcoma, cancer in boys under the ages of 6, was incredibly high as opposed to non-fluoridated. This is only one of 100 research articles available today, and with independent research claiming various health precautions associated with this consumption of fluoridated water. Some of these articles link fluoride consumption to bone cancer, hypothyroidism, low birth weight, slow development, and even kidney failure. A simple fact to keep in mind in a day where we eat so many processed foods, those foods contained unknown amounts of fluoride. With this factored in, our country has seen an increased level of children suffering from overexposure, most commonly caused dental fluoresis. It affects over 40% of the youth in our nation today. Fluoride is a topical application, meaning that it has no purpose in the body. This has been proven by science and questioned by many. I know that calling for an all-out ban is a long shot requiring serious legal guidance and a tremendous amount of effort amongst a large group of people and the city officials. It has been successfully done in the state of Ohio. 13 cities, to be precise, have removed fluoride completely from their city water supply. So my proposal is to ask simply that the city adopt a simple warning, and in this warning it states, your public water supply is fluoridated. When feeding infants under the ages of 12 months, liquid concentrate or powdered infant formula should be mixed with water that is fluoride-free. Consult your health care provider for more information. The American Dental Association and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommend that mothers feeding their babies do not make up instant formula using fluoridated water. So I encourage the discussion about fluoride here in Salem. If it's on the record or off, we need to talk about this. I feel it's imperative of government and citizens to work together to achieve this safe measure, the safety measure for a thriving community. I believe that if you gave me your time, I can overwhelmingly prove these facts are real. I cannot do this alone. I am asking for members of council to help me get this proposal on the floor for the discussion. This is one of many issues of our time. To date, over 300 cities have opted to remove fluoride completely. This warning being proposed is nothing new. It's implemented across the United States, especially the safety warning. So science has changed a lot over the last 40 years, and in conclusion, so is the research around that science. With very little results to smile about today, a majority pointing out the dangers rather than the benefits, we have the choice to do this together. I will continue my efforts to the best of my knowledge and ability here in Salem, as I have the choice. And you do too, to potentially save a parent and a child heartache. I have remained politically civil in my request this far. I have not brought any outside protest or outside media to the community as I feel it makes the city look negative. I am not opposed to taking these steps if necessary. I take this very, very seriously and hope that those next steps are not needed, as I see this is a public health concern. However, it needs to be addressed. This is something I am uncomfortable not being proactive about. If science is not enough, what is? I am not talking here just to come here and talk. I take this issue very seriously. I don't want to be dismissed or underestimated. I am educated deeply in these facts, and I know that this is a necessary safety measure for our city and feel that not issuing it would be negligent. I feel that if there were money at stake or money to talk about this issue, City Council would immediately get involved in the conversation. I like to think that this is not true, and I hope I'm wrong in my assumption, especially regarding something such as public safety. So with safety issues, I guess only time will tell. I mean, no offense to anyone directly. I want my city to get proactive now and not after everyone else has done this, because it's already being done. I thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I would suggest that at some point in time that maybe you speak with Mr. Brown, who's the chairperson of the Utilities Committee, and that might be a starting point.
Thank you. I needed that. I actually, that's great.
Mrs. Dickey.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes,
Mr.
yes.
Johnson? These cities that have opted out of the fluoridation program, has this been after the deadline to
Yes.
opt out? And do you know how they got
They
around the mandate?
They went around it using the federal constitution to override the state constitution.
And do you
As
have a,
of-
do you have a list of who those?
I do, not on me.
Can you just
Yeah.
email those to me?
But yeah, they use the federal constitution to trump the state constitution on the
Sure.
mandate,
Could-
so.
If you just either email those to me, so I
Yeah.
can look into it?
Sure thing.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you. That concludes the receiving of visitors. Move on then to report of city officials. Mayor Berlin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no official report, but I would like to recognize the Salem Quakers football program, the school, and all the support that they had from the community, and what a wonderful year they had. Record-setting year for the boys, and a lot of excitement. So congratulations to them, and best of luck in the rest of the school year.
Any questions for the mayor? Seeing none, thank you. Law Director, Attorney Zellers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had disseminated to council some changes that need to take place in ordinance number, I believe it's 58, thank you, 58 regarding the income tax modifications that the state is requiring as of January 1st. As you all recall, the voters were kind enough to approve the 0.25% increase in income tax for that specific purpose of the streets, and the pertinence is there too. So the language that needs to be added to the changes in our ordinance, I passed out to council. So that, at that time that ordinance comes out, I would ask that somebody make a motion to amend that ordinance to include this new language, okay? That is one thing. I guess I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognize the Salem Quaker football team. End of a terrific run. It's amazing to see those guys. A lot of them played a lot of backyard football in my yard growing up, and it's amazing to see how far those guys have come and how well they've done. So congratulations to all of you guys, and well done. And additionally, I would need a brief executive session following the meeting with no action that I'm requesting regarding litigation issues.
All right. Mr. Brown.
I have a question for you.
Just 1 second, okay? I will get back to you because I want to deal with
I'm sorry.
the executive session issue first. Do we have a motion for that? All right.
So moved.
Second with it. Do we need a roll call on that?
Yes, please.
All right, if we could have a roll call then, please.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes,
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, with that, we will go into executive session at the conclusion of the regular meeting. That way, and with no action being taken, we just would come back in to adjourn from that, as opposed to doing it now, having everybody go outside, wait a while, then come back in. For your convenience, we will do that way. All right, Mr. Brown.
yeah, I need an answer from Mr. Zellers on a letter I just received from Debbie Bricker, Administrative Assistant. I'm being asked to pay for the tapes that I asked for over a period of 3 months from the HPZ office regarding the meetings of April 6th and 13th. I was told at that time, either it was in the paper or somewhere I read it, that it would be taken out of council funds to pay for the DVDs. Now, I just got a statement for this that says I'm 3 months past due paying this, and Jerry Wolford would appreciate getting paid. Well, with all the BS I went through trying to get these CDs copied, I see no reason why I should have to pay these after all that stalling for almost 3 months. It was stated that it would be taken out of council funds, and that's the way I would like it done. Your opinion?
Well, Mr. Brown, I don't appreciate you putting me on the spot on something like that, but I will say
I hate to
this.
ask you.
I know we have an ordinance that indicates what the fees and costs are associated with personal, or with public record requests, so like any other citizen, if that's the request, I think you have to follow it.
I want to say one thing. I don't appreciate getting the runaround I got as a city councilman by the HPZ officer for that length of time, giving me all kinds of reasons why he couldn't give them to me. One was they couldn't make copies because he couldn't leave the building. Several other ones I received. And I am not a happy camper, and I'm going to take that unhappiness into the next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions for?
Just a quick question for the law director.
Mr. Drummond.
The file that I've got, or the copy of this 182 change, mine has 2 pages, electronically, but there's nothing on the second page. I just want to confirm, is the last part of it section B, 5B?
Mr. Drummond, yes, it is. 182.013B is the last part of it. We must have hit a additional return or something on that, but
Okay, I just want to make sure that I didn't miss something.
I appreciate that. It is
Okay.
a single page.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the law director? Right, seeing none, auditor, Mrs. Brothers.
Good evening, members of council, mayor, and Mr. President. We don't have a quorum tonight, so I was just coming up here to see if anybody had any questions about the budget or anything that was to be passed tonight, but since we don't have that, I just wanted to come up and see if anybody had any questions about anything that was presented. Also, I want to remind everybody that the employees of the city will be hosting the Banquet of Salem on December 7th, and anybody who would like to volunteer is more than welcome. I want to thank Mr. Apple, Mr. Drummond, and Mr. Cushman for their generous donations. One other thing is the Christmas parade will be on December 3rd at 6:30. I'm not sure if council is deciding to be a participant in that or not, but after the parade, that we will have the lighting of the tree, which is usually on a Friday night, but this year, on December 3rd, we'll have the Christmas parade at 6:30, and then the lighting at the chamber right afterwards. So I don't know if you guys will discuss if you're going to be in the parade.
I'll send something out to everybody via the email and see if they wish to participate or not.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Anything for the auditor?
So what, we need 6 to vote on the budget?
Mhm.
With, to have the emergency clause also
Oh,
with it.
To pass it tonight.
Yeah. Yes, and to pass that. Anything else then? All right, thank you, Mrs.
All right,
Brothers.
thank you.
Safety Service Director, Mr. Kentz.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mayor Berlin, and members of council. You've seen in the paper a couple of weeks ago, the overpass project is pretty much on target. Those fellows, even after the collapse, I think have made up the time. They're still shooting for the week after Thanksgiving. Today, in fact, the street itself is already in. Today, they are starting to pour the parapet, which is holds the railing and the fence. That will have to cure for a week. They're also pouring the basis for the street lights. So that will take a week before they get that up. The street lights are in. Ohio Edison has them, and the lamps, so we don't have to wait for that. So I think we'll be real comfortable that they're on schedule. They've done a real good job of catching up. The only part of that project that won't be done are the sidewalks. What we kind of ran into a little concern there, that they weren't going to do the sidewalks, but now they came back and they're going to repair the areas that are bad, and they're going to seal everything and replace some of the catch basins that are bad. They told us when they're done, it's going to look like they're new ones. So that part of the project won't be done until next spring. It will require closing of the overpass, but not both, just one-way traffic, and they'll have flaggers when they do that. It'll be for a short period of time. But it will be open for traffic in the near future. I'm not going to give you an exact date because we still have some weather to be concerned with. The next item I have is our new City Hall roof is scheduled to start construction this Friday. All the materials are in. The contractor had to wait for those, but they came in, we're ready to go. They're saying that project should take 1 to 2 weeks. Again, all this is weather dependent, so we'll see how it goes. And I also, one final thing, I'd like to just comment on Mr. Cahill's statement about the street lighting is, I don't know if he understands, that's not a city service. That's Ohio Edison. We are not responsible for that. As a courtesy to a lot of citizens, Mrs. Bricker phones in street lights that are out, but anyone can go on Ohio Edison's website and report an outage. They do not come in and report every time we have a light out. They wait till they get several at once so they can send a crew in to do them. Again, it's not a city function. That's Ohio Edison. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Kenst? Okay, thank you. Utilities, Mr. Weingart.
Mr. Chairman, members of council, honorable mayor, just wanted to report that we had a pre-construction meeting for the Benton Road Sanitary Sewer Extension today, and that the project will start probably a small amount before the end of this month. It is a 60-day contract, bringing the sanitary sewer from Pennsylvania Avenue to the general south side of Benton Road. And Utility Contracting is the contractor on that project. The bids were substantially below the engineer's estimate. And also, at the next meeting, perhaps there'll be a ordinance for bidding supplies for the Utilities Department for 2006.
Any questions? Mr.
I
Brown?
just have a comment, Mr. Weingart.
Yes, sir.
I received a copy of your draft where you want to order for the next years or so for chemicals and miscellaneous items to be used by the utility department. I see no reason to call a meeting. Just go ahead and take care of it.
Okay. Yes, this happens every year, so it's routine ordinance, but it has to be passed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Council Clerk, Mrs. Bricker.
Thank you, I don't have anything.
All right, that concludes the report of city officials. Move on to report of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had a fancy little report to read from our Finance Committee meeting, but I left it on my desk. I have to just go with what I remember, which isn't a lot anymore. We had a Finance Committee meeting on November 6th. November 5th, I mean. It started at 6. Present was a committee member, Mr. Whitehill, Mayor Berlin, Auditor Brothers. Also attending was Councilman Brown and Councilman Drummond. Thank you.
Mrs. Bricker comes
That,
to your rescue.
my my notes magically appeared. Thank you, Mrs. Bricker. The meeting was to discuss 3 items: the city's 2016 budget, an appropriation ordinance, and an updated wage ordinance. Auditor Brothers provided details on the 2016 budget, highlighting for the committee changes, which includes money for a K-9 officer and supplies, 2 new police cruisers, and an asphalt crack sealing machine. Among other items, the budget includes a 5% wage increase for school crossing guards and the city humane officer, as well as funding for a part-time clerk in the Housing, Planning, and Zoning Office, which would enable the housing inspectors and zoning officer to be out in the field more. Auditor Brothers noted the budget has not changed much from last year and is based on $4.93 million in tax receipts and a total expected revenue of $5,144,778. The expenses are projected at $5,682,668. There will be a projected $1.6 million carryover, and after the projected general fund deficit, there will still be more than $1 million carryover. That budget is before you tonight. Mrs. Brothers then explained an appropriation ordinance to the committee, which is also before you, and accounts for routine operating adjustments related to estimated and actual expenses, and for a payroll adjustment to an additional unanticipated pay period this year. Finally, a needed change to the wage ordinance was discussed and is also before you this evening. The adjustment is to the starting wages of the police and fire chief to bring them in line with the previous wage ordinance and to be appropriate to their position. The meeting was adjourned at 7:40 p.m. Mr. President, I have a couple of ordinances that are going to be given a third reading tonight. Are we able to do those?
Yes, we will be
Thank
able to
you.
give those the third reading this
Thank you.
evening.
And, Mr. President, I believe I have four new ordinances to introduce.
That is correct. The first will be number 64. That's dealing with authorizing appropriations and transfers. Number 65, which is the budget. Number 66, that being the adjusting of the salary and wages that you spoke to in your report. And number 67, that being to allow the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for quotes for engineering services for the streets project.
Mr. President, every one of those can only be given a first reading this evening?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Is there any report from Streets, Alleys, and Sidewalks? Any member that's on that?
No.
All right. Utilities, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have no report. Has been no meeting, but I'd like a moment to get the new ordinances out of my mailbox that I got here a little bit late.
I will have somebody get those for you and hand those over to you. All right. It's open. Traffic and Safety, Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. My committee has met. I have no report. I have been in touch with the Law Director's Office in regards to the proposed legislative amendments to the dog ordinances.
All right. Rules and Ordinances, Mrs. Dickey.
My committee has not met, but we do have a meeting scheduled for December 2nd at 6 p.m. to discuss parking in front yards and also possibly vacant homes if TCA has things ready for us by then.
All right, that was 6 o'clock, did you say?
6 o'clock.
All right. Thank you. Parks,
Mr. President,
Yes.
Sorry, what was the date of that again?
December 2nd. It's a Wednesday.
Parks, Mr. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. President. Parks Committee has not met. I have no report.
All right. Anyone from Economic Development have anything that needs to be reported? In Committee of the Whole, I don't believe that there has been any meeting with regards to that. We'll go ahead then and move on to the second and third readings of ordinances and resolutions.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Just have one comment. There were no copies of the ordinances in my mailbox like there usually are.
All right.
That's all right. I'll follow along very closely with the,
Mr. Brown,
what we're going through.
Mr. Brown, I'll provide you with my copies.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Oh, you want.
All right, second and third reading of ordinances and resolutions. We have number 58, that's the one that was indicated by our law director that was going to require the amendment to add the additional language that was provided to everybody. Is there a motion for that? Mr. Cushman?
I would like to make the motion to amend the ordinance to include the new language reflecting the tax increase.
All right. Mr. Whitehill, second. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right. It is so amended As to number 58 then, Mr. Cushman.
Mr. President, I move that the Madam Clerk read ordinance 58 by title only for passage.
Right. Would the clerk please read ordinance number 58 by title only for its final reading for passage this evening?
Being an ordinance to adopt Chapter 182 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem regarding municipal income tax.
All right, is there any discussion with regards to this? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on ordinance number 58 for passage this evening?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
All right, the ordinance number 58 passes. Mr. Cushman.
Mr. President, I move that Madam Clerk read ordinance 59 by title only for its final reading for passage this evening.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 59 by title only for its final reading?
Being an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into contract for the sale of one 1960 oak 72 by 36 drafting table with blueprint drawers.
All right, is there any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on ordinance number 59 for passage this evening?
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, the ordinance passes. As to then ordinance number 63, that was to be Mr. Nestick. What was that out of?
I think Brian did it last time.
Did you do it last time? If you would again, please, Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the clerk read ordinance 63 by title only for its third reading tonight.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 63 by title only for its final reading?
Being an ordinance creating Chapter 1337 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Salem, which adopts and incorporates by reference the International Property Maintenance Code, subject to the specific provisions stated herein for the purpose of regulating and governing the conditions and maintenance of all properties, buildings, and structures within the C3 Central Commercial Zoning District in the City of Salem.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. President?
Mr. Cushman.
I would just like to make a comment on this. I know Mr. Cahill has been gracious enough to come in here a couple of times and discuss his feelings for a board, and rightfully so, and he brings up a good point. However, I think this ordinance needs to pass as is, and I'm encouraging everybody here to give its passing vote this evening. If reading the ordinance, it's understood that the fire chief is the one who will do the negotiating and hear the complaints and resolve the complaints, hopefully with any property owner. And I think it would be a very rare instance that a board would need to be convened, and in that case, I believe the Housing Planning Zoning Board would fill that need. It's difficult enough, as we all know, trying to find people to fill the various openings in the city and the boards and committees that we have. I think that in the rare event that this board would need to be convened, that it would be very difficult to find enough people to populate this board and stay a part and active in this board. And I really believe that we should just entrust the ability of our fire chief to resolve the issues, any issues that come up. So with that, again, I want to encourage anyone who's going to vote yes for this.
Mrs. Dickey.
I would like to have this pass the way it is tonight and get started on this process. I think it's really critical to our downtown at this time with things that are going on down there. But I would also like to leave the door open to amend that in the future if we have volunteers who are architects, construction people, engineers, those types of things, would like to step forward and sit on a board, and then you could review that and consider that in the future.
Mr. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. President. I concur with Mrs. Dickey. I think, let's get it on the books. But Mr. Cushman, I think there might be people we're not aware of out there that's prepared to step forward, and we shouldn't discourage them. Maybe by hearing this being passed and these comments, those that are qualified to serve on such a board under the guise of the fire chief might come forward. And if that should happen, I think the next council will could address it and amend that, so that's why I comment.
Mr. Brown, you had your hand up.
Yes. I'm just very disappointed we didn't get that change from the Board of Zoning Appeals to a board of qualified people, as Mr. Cahill pointed out. I've seen many times during my 8 years as a councilman in Salem that sometimes we put things on the book and never get changed. We have things that were put on the books back in the 70s, 80s that are antique and never been changed. I'm very disappointed that we didn't have a discussion to do an amendment. Matter of fact, I had already designed an amendment, which I gave Mr. Cahill a copy of. And I'm not a happy camper. I don't like to be a happy camper twice in one night, but I think we're not doing proper justice because I can't think of any way the Board of Zoning Appeals is qualified to listen to somebody found to have something looked at and get approval or change things. These people aren't qualified for that. That's all I have to say.
I was going to say, Mr. Whitehill, you're the only one we haven't heard from.
I like to be patient.
That's fine.
I believe probably more than leave the door open or could, I believe we should look at that. I believe there's definitely merit to getting higher qualifications in that role. I believe that this gives a lot of specifics that we can get started with, that the chief can get these inspections going. I also feel that it could take 3 to 6 months probably easily to get that done, to get a new board created and so forth, but I think we should. And I think we should move this to committee of the whole. Obviously, probably will transition to a new council to begin that process. But I fear the idea of waiting longer to get that board constituted. The appeals probably wouldn't happen immediately because the inspections are going to get started. There's a target list that we know that the group went through from the outside facade standpoint of what to look at. So just as far as my opinion on record is we should look at that. We should make those moves. We should begin that work soon.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on ordinance number 63 for passage this evening?
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
I have never held back progress in the city of Salem. I will vote yes with the pending amendment coming next year. Thank you.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
All right, that concludes the second and third reading of ordinances and resolutions. We'll move on to the introduction of ordinances and resolutions. Mr. Cushman.
Mr. President, I move that Madam Clerk read ordinance 64 by title only with emergency clause for its first reading.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 64 for its first reading this evening by title only?
Being an ordinance authorizing appropriations and transfers as set forth below and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Cushman.
Are we moving on to the next ordinance, Mr. President?
Yes.
Mr. President, I move that the clerk read ordinance number 65 by title only with the emergency clause for its first reading.
Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 65 by title only for its first reading with emergency clause?
Being an ordinance to make appropriations for current expenses and other expenditures for the city of Salem, state of Ohio, during the year ending December 31st, 2016, and declaring an emergency.
Right. Mr. Cushman.
Mr. President, I move that the clerk read ordinance number 66 by title only with the emergency clause for its first reading.
All right. Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 66 by title only with emergency clause for its first reading?
Being an ordinance to supersede ordinance 150203-06, establishing and adjusting salaries, wages, and other benefits for non-represented city employees and non-represented city and elected officials of the city of Salem, repealing all prior inconsistent ordinances herewith, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Cushman.
Mr. President, ordinance number 67 did not come out of committee. I would need to suspend council rules. Do we need a quorum for that, sir?
No, we have enough with regards to that.
Oh, I apologize.
So you're making
Yes,
that
thank you.
motion then?
Mr. President, I move the council suspend council rules so that ordinance number 67 can be considered tonight.
Right. Is there a second? Mr. Whitehill. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Whitehill?
Yes.
Mr. Drummond?
Yes.
Mrs. Dickey?
Yes.
Mr. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
All right, council rules are suspended. Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the clerk read ordinance number 67 by title only with emergency clause for its first reading.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you please read ordinance number 67 with the emergency clause by title only for its first reading this evening?
Being an ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for quotes for engineering services for the Salem Streets project and declaring an emergency.
All right, thank you. That concludes the introduction of ordinances and resolutions at this time. Go ahead and move on to the pleasure of council. Mr. Brown.
I have nothing this evening, thank you.
Mr. Whitehill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to quickly concur about the street lighting, especially down on South Lundy, directly next to the theater where I was standing last night in the dark, speaking with someone else. May we at least reach out to Ohio Edison and make them aware of it from a safety standpoint in our downtown shopping area? We'll ask the administration if we can make that call. To that point, another production at the Salem Community Theater, which is A Country Christmas, a musical version of the Dickens tale. I know of at least one household in Salem that all 4 members are in lead roles for that. So this will be very special. Again, please support the community theater. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's too late to ask to amend the 59 about the sale of that big, huge table that we can't make it so that my wife can't buy it, right? 'Cause I'm afraid she'd see that, she'd want me to drag it into the house somehow, but be that as it may. Oh, and Mr. Whitehill, should we get an autograph from you guys now? Because they'll be valuable later?
Yeah, maybe from my daughter, maybe.
Okay. And finally, for tonight, Mr. Cahill, I don't think anybody on this council tries to, or comes on here looking for praise, and I, for one, am never good at receiving it. I appreciate the comments. I think everybody who sits on council does what they think is best for the city, regardless of whether it benefits themselves or somebody they know or whatever. But I do appreciate the recognition. Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Dickey.
First of all, I would like to ask everybody to keep in their prayers all the victims of terrorism in Paris this last weekend, and also the Russian airline bombing and the Syrian families who are seeking refuge to get away from that war area. I can't imagine what it would be like to have to put my family on a boat where they might not make it across the sea to get away from something so horrible that I would be willing to take that risk. I would also like to give everybody happy Thanksgiving coming up here, and I hope that you remember all the people in your neighborhood who may need to be included in family gatherings or maybe need a pie or something to make their Thanksgiving good. We have a lot of people who can't get out of their homes or who don't have as much as the rest of us. I also, in looking at the local news this week, am very grateful again for the council for cooperating and passing the sign ordinance last meeting for the perpendicular signs, looking at what's going on in Lisbon with their restored building and not allowing those projecting signs to be on the building. I just want to say, Mrs. Lewis, if you have any other money you want to spend fixing a building, we have lots of them here in Salem. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cushman.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the last council meeting, I meant to wish Happy Veterans Day, which was the following Wednesday, to all of those who have served or who is serving in our country, and I didn't do that. Forgive me, and allow me to express my gratitude to you and to say that we should honor and thank our veterans, not just one day a year, but every day of the year, for our freedom and our way of life. I'd like to congratulate Salem head football coach Rod Johnson, his coaches and assistants, and every one of their players on a very exciting season. To the team, I say your city is very proud of you. It may have ended sooner than you have wanted, but your teamwork pulled this community together, and you gave us all a thrill. Congratulations to all of you. I also would like to say, I noticed the entrance signs to Salem are going up, and they're already looking quite impressive. Those signs will welcome visitors and residents to a city that is on the rebound. I am excited to think how nice they will look, coupled with our improving streets program. Our prayers, echo what Mrs. Dickey said, go out to everyone affected in that inhumane tragedy in Paris. I pray that the grace of God brings comfort to all those suffering in this extraordinarily difficult time. There is evil out there, and it is relentless, but we cannot let them alter how we live or go about our lives. In fact, it should embolden us to live fearless, because hiding in the shadows is precisely what these barbarians want us to do. These are pathetic, spineless cowards who don't have the guts to face the militaries or the polices of the world, so they resort to killing innocent people to promote their sick and perverted beliefs. Hopefully, these animals will see that their tactics only serve to unite the world against them. Finally, we'd like to wish everyone a very happy and safe Thanksgiving. We have a lot to be thankful for from our safe little haven here in Northeast Ohio. That is all.
Thank you. I too would like to congratulate the football team. It's a thrill to get to play on a team like that, and it does pull the community together. I too, my thoughts and prayers go out to all those folks in the world and those world events that have taken place. We are fortunate that we live where we live at, and that we have those that are willing to protect our freedoms. And also, everybody have a safe and happy Thanksgiving. That concludes the meeting. We go into, thank you for reminding me, we go into executive session at this time.